rising ground to your right and on your rear, so that the danger may be in front and safety lie behind. So much for campaigning in flat country. These, mountains, rivers, marshes, and plains, are the four useful branches of military knowledge which enable the Yellow Emperor to vanquish four sovereigns. All armies prefer high ground to low, and sunny places to dark. If you are careful for your men, and camp on hard ground, the army will be free from disease of every kind, and this will spell victory. When you come to a hill or a bank, occupy the sunny side, the slope on your right rear. Thus you will act for the benefit of your soldiers, and utilize the natural advantages of the ground. When, in consequence of heavy rains up country, a river which you wish to ford is swollen and flecked with foam, you must wait until it subsides. Country in which there are precipitous cliffs with torrents running between, deep natural hollows, places, tangled thickets, quagmires, and crevices, should be left with all possible speed or else not approached. While we keep away from such places, we should get the enemy to approach them. While we face such places, we should let the enemy have them on his rear. If in the neighborhood of your camp there is any hilly country, ponds surrounded by aquatic grass, hollow basins filled with reeds, or woods with thick undergrowth, they must be carefully routed out and searched, for these are places where men in ambush or insidious spies are likely to be lurking. When the enemy is close at hand and remains quiet, he is relying on the natural strength of his position. When he keeps aloof and tries to provoke a battle, he is anxious for the other side to advance. If his place of encampment is easy of access, he is offering you bait. Movement among the trees of a forest shows that the enemy is advancing. The appearance of unlikely objects in the midst of thick grass means that the enemy wants to make us suspicious. The rising of birds into flight is the sign of an ambush. Startled beasts indicate that a sudden attack is coming. When there is dust rising in a high column, it is the sign of chariots advancing. When the dust is low and spread over a wide area, it betokens the approach of infantry. When it branches out in different directions, it shows that parties have been sent to collect firewood. A few clouds of dust moving to and fro signify that an army is encamping. Humble words and increased preparations are signs that the enemy is about to advance. Violent language and driving forward as if to attack are signs that he will retreat. When the light chariots come out first and take up a position on the wings, it is a sign that the enemy is forming for battle. Peace proposals unaccompanied by a sworn covenant indicate a plot. Where there is much running about and the soldiers fall into rank, it means that the critical moment has come. When some are seen advancing and some retreating, it is a lure. When the soldiers stand leaning on their spears, they are faint from want of food. If those who are sent to draw water begin by drinking themselves, the army is suffering from thirst. If the enemy sees an advantage to be gained and makes no effort to secure it, the soldiers are exhausted. If birds gather on any spot it is unoccupied, a useful way to tell that the enemy has abandoned his camp. Clamor by night betokens nervousness. If there is disturbance in the camp, the general's authority is weak. If the banners and flags are shifted about, sedition is afoot. If the officers are angry, it means that the men are weary. When an army feeds its horses with grain and kills its cattle for food, and when the men do not hang their cooking pots over the campfires, showing that they will not return to their tents, you may know that they are determined to fight to the death. The sight of men whispering together in small knots or speaking in subdued tones points to disaffection among the rank and file. Too frequent rewards signify that the enemy is at the end of his resources. Too many punishments betray a condition of dire distress. To begin by bluster, but afterward to take fright at the enemy's numbers, shows a supreme lack of intelligence. When envoys are sent with compliments in their mouths, it's a sign that the enemy wishes for a truce. If the enemy's troops march up angrily and remain facing ours for a long time without either joining battle or taking themselves off again, the situation is one that demands great vigilance and circumspection. If our troops are no more in number than the enemy, that is amply sufficient. It only means that no direct attack can be made. What we can do is simply to concentrate all our available strength, keep a close watch on the enemy, and obtain reinforcements. He who exercises no forethought, but makes light of his opponents, is sure to be captured by them. If soldiers are punished before they have grown attached to you, they will not prove submissive, and unless submissive, they will be practically useless. If, when the soldiers have become attached to you, punishments are not enforced, the soldiers will still be useless. Therefore, soldiers must be treated in the first instance with humanity, but kept under control by means of iron discipline. This is a certain road to victory. If in training soldiers, commands are habitually enforced, the army will be well disciplined. If not, its discipline will be bad. If a general shows confidence in his men, but always insists on his orders being obeyed, the game will be mutual.
Du Mu said, "Do not linger among barren uplands, but keep close to supplies of water and grass."
Zhang Yu supported this idea with the following story. Ma Yuan was sent to exterminate the robber captain, Wu Du Qian, who had found a refuge in the hills. Ma Yuan made no attempt to force a battle, but seized all the favorable positions commanding supplies of water and forage. Jiang was soon in such a desperate plight for want of provisions that he was forced to make a total surrender. He did not know the advantage of keeping in the neighborhood of valleys.
Li Chuan told of the great victory won by Han Xin over Longzhu at the Wei River. The two armies were drawn up on opposite sides of the river. In the night, Han Xin ordered his men to take some 10,000 sacks filled with sand and to construct a dam a little higher up. Then, leading half his army across, he attacked Longzhu. After a time, pretending to have failed in his attempt, he hastily withdrew to the other bank. Longzhu was much elated by this unlooked-for success, and exclaiming, "I felt sure that Han Xin was really a coward," he pursued him and began crossing the river in his turn. Han Xin now sent a party to cut open the sandbags, thus releasing a great volume of water, which swept down and prevented the greater portion of Longzhu's army from getting across. He then turned upon the force which had been cut off and annihilated it, Longzhu himself being among the slain. The rest of the army on the further bank also scattered and fled in all directions.
Mei Yao Chen said, "High ground is not only more agreeable, but more convenient from a military point of view. Low ground is not only damp and unhealthy, but also disadvantageous for fighting."
Zhang Yu quoted Liao Tzu, "The art of giving orders is not to try to rectify minor blunders and not to be swayed by petty doubts."
distinguish 6 kinds of terrain: accessible ground, entangling ground, standstill ground, narrow passes, precipitous heights, positions at a great distance from the enemy. Ground which can be freely traversed by both sides is called accessible. With ground of this nature, be before the enemy in occupying the raised and sunny spots, and carefully guard your line of supplies. Then you will be able to fight with advantage. Ground which can be abandoned but is hard to reoccupy is called entangling. From a position of this sort, if the enemy is unprepared, you may sally forth and defeat him. But if the enemy is prepared for your coming, and you fail to defeat him, then, return being impossible, disaster will ensue. When the position is such that neither side will gain by making the first move, it is called standstill ground. Each side finds it difficult to move, and the situation remains at a deadlock. In a position of this sort, even though the enemy should offer attractive bait, it will be advisable not to stir forth, but rather to retreat, thus enticing the enemy in his turn. Then, when part of his army has come out, we may deliver our attack with advantage. With regard to narrow passes, if you can occupy them first, let them be strongly garrisoned and await the advent of the enemy. Should the enemy forestall you in occupying a pass, do not go after him if the pass is fully garrisoned, but only if it is weakly garrisoned. With regard to precipitous heights, if you arrive before your adversary, occupy the raised and sunny spots, and there wait for him to come up. If the enemy has occupied precipitous heights before you, do not follow him, but retreat and try to entice him away. If you are situated at a great distance from the enemy, and the strength of the 2 armies is equal, it is not easy to provoke a battle, and fighting will be to your disadvantage. These 6 are the principles connected with earth. The general who has attained a responsible post must be careful to study them. An army may be exposed to 6 calamities, not arising from natural causes, but from faults for which the general is responsible. These are flight, insubordination, collapse, ruin, disorganization, and rout. Other conditions being equal, if one force is hurled against another 10 times its size, the result will be the flight of the former. When the common soldiers are too strong and their officers too weak, the result is insubordination. When the officers are too strong and the common soldiers too weak, the result is collapse. When the higher officers are angry and insubordinate, and on meeting the enemy give battle on their own account from a feeling of resentment, before the commander-in-chief can tell whether or not he is in a position to fight, the result is ruin. When the general is weak and without authority, when his orders are not clear and distinct, when there are no fixed duties assigned to officers and men, and the ranks are formed in a slovenly, haphazard manner, the result is utter disorganization. When a general, unable to estimate the enemy's strength, allows an inferior force to engage a larger one, or hurls a weak detachment against a powerful one, and neglects to place picked soldiers in the front rank, the result must be a rout. These are 6 ways of courting defeat, which must be carefully noted by the general who has attained a responsible post. The natural formation of the country is the soldier's best ally, but the power of estimating the adversary, of controlling the forces of victory, and of shrewdly calculating difficulties, dangers, and distances constitutes the test of a great general. He who knows these things, and in fighting puts his knowledge into practice, will win his battle. He who knows them not, nor practices them, will surely be defeated. If fighting is sure to result in victory, then you must fight, even though the ruler forbid it. If fighting will not result in victory, then you must not fight, even at the ruler's bidding. The general who advances without coveting fame, and retreats without fearing disgrace, Regard your soldiers as your children, and they will follow you into the deepest valleys. Look on them as your own beloved sons, and they will stand by you even unto death. If, however, you are indulgent, but unable to make your authority felt, kind-hearted, but unable to enforce your commands, and incapable, moreover, of quelling disorder, then your soldiers must be likened to spoiled children. They are useless for any practical purpose. If we know that our own men are in a condition to attack, but are unaware that the enemy is not open to attack, we have gone only halfway toward victory. If we know that the enemy is open to attack, but are unaware that our own men are not in a condition to attack, we have gone only halfway toward victory. If we know that the enemy is open to attack, and also know that our men are in a condition to attack, but are unaware that the nature of the ground makes fighting impracticable, we have still gone only halfway toward victory. The experienced soldier, once in motion, is never bewildered. Once he has broken camp, he is never at a loss. Hence the saying, if you know the enemy and know yourself, your victory will not stand in doubt. If you know heaven and know earth, you may make your victory complete.
Zheng Yu told the story about Pei Xingjian, who was sent on a punitive expedition against the Turkic tribes. At nightfall, he pitched his camp as usual, and it had already been completely fortified by wall and ditch when suddenly he gave orders that the army should shift its quarters to a hill nearby. This was highly displeasing to his officers, who protested loudly against the extra fatigue which it would entail on the men. Pei Xingjian, however, paid no heed to the remonstrances and had the camp moved as quickly as possible. Later that night, a terrific storm came on, which flooded their former place of encampment to the depth of over 12 feet. The recalcitrant officers were amazed at the sight and owned that they had been in the wrong. "How did you know what was going to happen?" they asked. Pei Xingjian replied, "From this time forward, be content to obey orders without asking unnecessary questions."
Chen Hao defined the 6 ways of courting defeat as follows: neglect to estimate the enemy's strength, want of authority, defective training, unjustifiable anger, non-observance of discipline, failure to use picked men.
Du Mu told this story of the famous General Wu Qi. He wore the same clothes and ate the same food as the meanest of his soldiers, refused to have either a horse to ride or a mat to sleep on, carried his own surplus rations wrapped in a parcel, and shared every hardship with his men. One of his soldiers was suffering from an abscess, and Wu Qi himself sucked out the virus. The soldier's mother, hearing this, began wailing and lamenting. Somebody asked her, "Why are you crying? Your son is only a common soldier, and yet the commander-in-chief himself
Parents
has
don't
sucked
become
the poison from
all-knowing
his
by
sword."
themselves.
The woman replied, "Many years ago, Lord Wu performed a similar service for my husband, who never left him afterward, and finally met his death at the hands of the enemy. Now that he has done the same for my son, he too will fall fighting I know not where."
Li Chuan tells similarly of the Viscount Zhou, whose soldiers were suffering severely from cold. He made a round of the whole army, comforting and encouraging the men. Straightway they felt as if they were clothed in garments lined with silk. Du Mu told the story of Lu Meng during the occupation of the town of Jiangli. He had given orders to his army not to rescue inhabitants, nor to remove from them by force. Nevertheless, a certain officer serving under his banner, who happened to be from the same town as the general, ventured to appropriate a bamboo hat belonging to one of the people in order to wear it over his regulation helmet as protection against the rain. Lumang considered the fact that as being a native of the same town as the culprit should not be allowed to palliate a clear breach of discipline, and accordingly he ordered his summary execution, tears rolling down his face. However, as he did so, this act of severity filled the army with wholesome awe, and from that time forth, even articles dropped in the highway were not picked up.
Chapter 11. The 9 Situations. 9 strategic kinds of ground. Advantages of adversity. Changing plans. 9 principles. Alliances. And rewards.
Sun Tzu said, "The art of war recognizes 9 varieties of ground: dispersive ground, facile ground, contentious ground, open ground, ground of intersecting highways, serious ground, difficult ground, hemmed-in ground, desperate ground." When a chieftain is fighting in his own territory, it is dispersive ground, so called because the soldiers, being near to their homes and anxious to see their wives and children, are likely to seize the opportunity afforded by a battle and scatter in every direction. When he has penetrated into hostile territory, but to no great distance, it is facile ground. Ground that can be of great advantage to either side is contentious ground. Ground on which each side has liberty of movement is open ground. Ground which forms the key to 3 contiguous states, so that he who occupies it first has most of the empire at his command, is ground of intersecting highways. When an army has penetrated into the heart of hostile country, leaving a number of fortified cities in its rear, it is serious ground. Mountain forests, rugged steeps, marshes, and fens, all country that is hard to traverse. This is difficult ground. Ground which is reached through narrow gorges, and from which we can only retire by tortuous paths, so that a small number of the enemy would suffice to crush a large body of our own men. This is hemmed-in ground. Ground on which we can only be saved from destruction by fighting without delay. This is desperate ground. On dispersive ground, therefore, fight not. On facile ground, halt not. On contentious ground, attack not. On open ground, do not try to block the enemy's way. On ground of intersecting highways, join hands with your allies. On serious ground, gather in provisions from all sides. In difficult ground, keep steadily on the march. On hemmed-in ground, resort to stratagem. On desperate ground, fight. Those who were called skillful leaders of old knew how to drive a wedge between the enemy's front and rear, to prevent cooperation between his large and small divisions, to hinder the good troops from rescuing the bad, the officers from rallying their men. For the enemy's men were scattered, they prevented them from gathering. Even when their forces were united, they managed to keep them in disorder. When it was to their advantage, they made a forward move. In other soldiers into positions whence there is no escape, and they will prefer death to flight. If they will face death, there is nothing they may not achieve. Officers and men alike will put forth their uttermost strength. Soldiers in desperate straits lose the sense of fear. If there is no place of refuge, they will stand firm. If they're in the heart of a hostile country, they will show a stubborn front. If there is no help fit, they will fight hard. Thus, without waiting to be marshaled, the soldiers will be constantly on the alert. Without waiting to be asked, they will do your will. Without restrictions, they will be faithful. Even without orders, they can be trusted. Prohibit the studying of omens and do away with superstitious doubts. Then, until death itself comes,
if our soldiers are not overburdened with money, it is not because they have a distaste for riches. If their lives are not unduly long, it is not because they are disinclined to longevity. The general must see to it that temptations to shirk fighting and grow rich are not thrown in the way of his men. On the day they are ordered out to battle, your soldiers may weep, those sitting up bedewing their garments, and those lying down letting the tears run down their cheeks. But let them once be brought to bay, and they will display the courage of a Chuan Chu or Tsao Gui. The skillful tactician may be likened to the Shuaizhan. Now the Shuaizhan is a snake that is found in the Chang Mountains. Strike at its head, and you will be attacked by its tail. Strike at its tail, and you will be attacked by its head. Strike at its middle, and you will be attacked by head and tail both. Asked if an army can be made to imitate the Shuaizhan, I should answer, yes. For the men of Wu and the men of Yue are enemies. Yet if they are crossing a river in the same boat and are caught by a storm, they will come to each other's assistance, just as the left hand helps the right. It is not enough to put one's trust in the tethering of horses and the bearing of chariot wheels in the ground. It is not enough to render flight impossible by such mechanical means. You will not succeed unless your men have tenacity and unity of purpose, and above all, a spirit of sympathetic cooperation. This is the lesson which can be learned from the Shuaizhan. The principle on which to manage an army is to set up one standard of courage that all must reach. How to make the best of both strong and weak is a question involving the proper use of ground. Thus, the skillful general conducts his army just as though he were leading a single man by the hand. It is the business of a general to be quiet and thus ensure secrecy. He must be upright and just, and thus maintain order. He must be able to mystify his officers and men by false reports and appearances, and thus keep them in total ignorance. By altering his arrangements and changing his plans, the leader keeps the enemy without definite knowledge. By shifting his camp and taking circuitous routes, he prevents the enemy from anticipating his purpose. At the critical moment, the leader of an army acts like one who has climbed up a height, and then kicks away the ladder behind him. He carries his men deep into hostile territory before he shows his hand. He burns his boats and breaks his cooking pots. Like a shepherd driving sheep, he drives his men this way and that, and none knows whither he is going. It is the business of a general to muster his host and bring it into danger. The different measures suited to the 9 varieties of ground, the expediency of aggressive or defensive tactics, and the fundamental laws of human nature. These are things that must most certainly be studied. When invading hostile territory, the general principle is that penetrating deeply brings cohesion. Penetrating but a short way means dispersion.
leave your own country behind and take your army across neighboring territory, you find yourself on critical ground. When there are means of communication on all four sides, the ground is one of the intersecting highways. When you penetrate deeply into a country, it is serious ground. When you penetrate but a little way, it is facile ground. When you have the enemy's strongholds on your rear and narrow passes in front, it is hemmed in ground. When there is no place of refuge at all, it is desperate ground. Therefore, on dispersive ground, I would inspire my men with unity of purpose. On facile ground, I would see that there is close connection between all parts of my army. On contentious ground, I would hurry up my rear guard. On open ground, I would keep a vigilant eye on my defenses. On ground at intersecting highways, I would consolidate my alliances. On serious ground, I would try to ensure a continuous stream of supplies. On difficult ground, I would keep pushing on along the road. On hemmed-in ground, I would block any way of retreat. On desperate ground, I would proclaim to my soldiers the hopelessness of saving their lives. For it is the soldier's disposition to offer an obstinate resistance when surrounded, to fight hard when he cannot help himself, and to obey promptly when he has fallen into danger. We cannot enter into alliance with neighboring princes until we are acquainted with their designs. We are not fit to lead an army on the march unless we are familiar with the face of the country, its mountains and forests, its pitfalls and precipices, its marshes and swamps. We shall be unable to turn natural advantages to account unless we make use of local guides. To be ignorant of any one of the following principles does not befit a warlike prince. When a warlike prince attacks a powerful state, his generalship shows itself in preventing the concentration of the enemy's forces. He overawes his opponents, and their allies are prevented from joining against him. Hence, he does not strive to ally himself with all and sundry, nor does he foster the power of other states. He carries out his own secret designs, keeping his antagonists in awe. Thus, he is able to capture their cities and overthrow their kingdoms. Bestow rewards without regard to rule. Issue orders without regard to previous arrangements, and you will be able to handle a whole army as though you had to do with but a single man. Confront your soldiers with the deed itself. Never let them know your design. When the outlook is bright, bring it before their eyes, but tell them nothing when the situation is gloomy. Place your army in deadly peril, and it will survive. Plunge it into desperate straits, and it will come through in safety. For it is precisely when a force has fallen into harm's way that it is capable of striking a blow for victory. Success in warfare is gained by carefully accommodating ourselves to the enemy's purpose. By persistently hanging on the enemy's flank, we shall succeed in the long run in killing the commander-in-chief. This is called the ability to accomplish a thing by sheer cunning. On the day that you take up your command, block the frontier passes, destroy all passports and permits, and stop the passage of all emissaries either to or from the enemy's country. Be stern in the council chamber so that you may control the situation. If the enemy leaves the door open, you must rush in. Forestall your opponent by seizing what he holds dear, and subtly contrive to time his arrival on the ground. Walk in the path
top speed. Li Jing was sent to reduce the rebel Xiao Xian, who had set up as emperor at Qingzhou Fu. It was autumn, and the Yangtze being then in flood, Xiao Xian never dreamt that his adversary would venture to come down through the gorges, and consequently made no preparations. But Li Jing embarked his army without loss of time, and was just about to start when the other generals implored him to postpone his departure until the river was in a less dangerous state for navigation. Li Jing replied, "To the soldier, overwhelming speed is of paramount importance, and he must never miss opportunities. Now is the time to strike, before Xiao Xian even knows that we have got an army together. If we seize the present moment when the river is in flood, we shall appear before his capital with startling suddenness, like the thunder which is heard before you have the time to stop your ears against it. This is the great principle in war. Even if he gets to know of our approach, he will have to levy his soldiers in such a hurry that they will not be fit to oppose us. Thus the full fruits of victory will be ours." All came about as he predicted, and Xiao Xian was obliged to surrender, nobly stipulating that his people should be spared, and he alone suffer the penalty of death.
Shen told this story of General Wang Jian, who had invaded the Chu state, where a universal draft was instituted to oppose him. Being doubtful of the temper of his troops, Wang Jian declined all invitations to fight and remained strictly on the defensive. In vain did the Chu general try to force a battle. Day after day, Wang Jian kept inside his walls and would not come out, but devoted his whole time and energy to winning the affection and confidence of his men. He took care that they should be well fed, sharing his own meals with them, provided facilities for bathing, and employed every method of judicious indulgence to weld them into a loyal and homogeneous body. After some time had elapsed, he told certain persons to find out how the men were amusing themselves. The answer was that they were competing with one another at lifting weights and broad jumps. When Wang Jian heard that they were engaged in these athletic pursuits, he knew that their spirits had been strung up to the required pitch and that they were now ready for fighting. By this time, the Chu army, after repeating their challenge again and again, had marched away eastward in disgust. Wang Jian immediately broke up his camp and followed them, and in the battle that ensued, they were routed with great slaughter.
Zhao Gong said this of soldiers weeping. This is not because they are afraid, but because all have embraced the firm resolution to do or die.
Yuan Zhu and Cao Gui were heroes known for personal valor. Yuan Zhu committed an assassination at the cost of his own life, while Cao Gui, during a delicate treaty negotiation, held a knife against the chest of his opponent until he was promised full restitution of lands.
Do you said, burn your baggage, throw away your supplies, choke up the wells, destroy your cooking stoves, and make it plain to your men that they cannot survive but must fight to the death.
Mei Yao Chen said, "The only chance of life lies in giving up all hope of it."
Zhang Yu, speaking of being deeply involved in a perilous position, told this story. When Pan Chao arrived at Shanshan, Guan, the king of the country, received him with great politeness and respect. But shortly afterward, his behavior underwent a sudden change, and he became remiss and negligent. Pan Chao spoke about this to his officers. "Have you not noticed," he said, "that Guang's polite attentions are on the wane? This must signify that envoys have come from the northern barbarians, and that consequently he is in a state of indecision, not knowing with which side to throw in his lot." Thereupon he called one of the natives who had been assigned to his service and set a trap for him, saying, "Where are those envoys from the Xiongnu who arrived some days ago?" The man was so taken aback that, between surprise and fear, he presently blurted out the whole truth. Pan Chao, keeping his informant carefully under lock and key, then summoned a gathering of his officers, 36 in all, and began drinking with them. When the wine had mounted into their heads a little, he tried to rouse their spirits still further by addressing them thus: "Gentlemen, here we are in the heart of an isolated region, anxious to achieve riches and honor by some great exploit. Now it happens that an ambassador from the Xiongnu arrived in this kingdom only a few days ago, and the result is that the respectful courtesy extended toward us by our royal host has disappeared. Should this envoy prevail upon him to seize our party and hand us over to the Xiongnu, our bones will become food for the wolves of the desert. What are we to do?" With one accord, the officers replied, "Standing as we do in peril of our lives, we will follow our commander through life and death."
Mei Yao Chen constructed this chain of reasoning. In attacking a powerful state, if you can divide her forces, you will have a superiority in strength. If you have a superiority in strength, you will overawe the enemy. If you overawe the enemy, the neighboring states will be frightened. If the neighboring states are frightened, the enemy's allies will be prevented from joining her.
Zhan Yu and Jin Lin said, "Your arrangements should not be divulged beforehand. There should be no fixity in your rules and arrangements."
Chapter 12. Attack by fire and water. Cultivating resources.
Sun Tzu said, "There are 5 ways of attacking with fire. The first is to burn soldiers in their camp. The second is to burn supplies. The third is to burn baggage trains. The fourth is to burn arsenals and magazines. The fifth is to hurl dropping fire among the enemy." In order to carry out an attack with fire, we must have means available. The material for raising fire should always be kept in readiness. There is a proper season for making attacks with fire, and special days for starting a conflagration. The proper season is when the weather is very dry. The special days are those when the moon is in the constellations of the sieve, the wall, the wing, or the crossbar. For these 4 are all days of rising wind. In attacking with fire, one should be prepared to meet 5 possible developments. 1. When fire breaks out inside the enemy's camp, respond at once with an attack from without. 2. If there is an outbreak of fire but the enemy's soldiers remain quiet, bide your time and do not attack. 3. When the force of the flames has reached its height, follow it up with an attack, if that is practicable. If not, stay where you are. 4. If it is possible to make an assault with fire from without, do not wait for it to break out within, but deliver your attack at a favorable moment. 5. When you start a fire, be to the windward of it. Do not attack from the leeward. A wind that rises in the daytime lasts long, but a night breeze soon falls. In every army, the 5 developments connected with fire must be known, the movements of the stars calculated, and a watch kept for the proper days. Hence, those who use fire as an aid to the attack show intelligence. Those who use water as an aid to the attack gain an accession of strength. By means of water, an enemy may be intercepted, but not robbed of all his belongings. Unhappy is the fate of one who tries to win his battles and succeed in his attacks without cultivating the spirit of enterprise, for the result is waste of time and general stagnation. Hence the saying, "The enlightened ruler lays his plans well ahead. The good general cultivates his resources." Move not unless you see an advantage. Use not your troops unless there is something to be gained. Fight not unless the position is critical. No ruler should put troops into the field merely to satisfy his own rage. No general should fight a battle simply out of anger. Anger may in time change to gladness. Vexation may be succeeded by content. But a kingdom that has once been destroyed can never come again into being, nor can the dead ever be brought back to life. Hence, the enlightened ruler is heedful, and the good general full of caution. This is the way to keep a country at peace, and an army intact.
Dumu illustrated the principle of attack by fire with these anecdotes. The famous Li Ling once baffled the leader of the Xiang Nu when the latter, taking advantage of a favorable wind, tried to set fire to the Chinese general's camp, only to find that every scrap of combustible vegetation in the neighborhood had already been burned down. On the other hand, Po Zai, a general of the Yellow Turban rebels, was badly defeated through his neglect of this simple precaution. At the head of a large army, he was besieging a very small garrison held by Wang Fu Sung, who called his officers together and said, "In war, there are various indirect methods of attack, and numbers do not count for everything. Now the rebels have pitched their camp in the midst of thick grass which will easily burn when the wind blows. If we set fire to it at night, they will be thrown into a panic, and we can make a sortie and attack them on all sides at once." That evening a strong breeze sprang up, so Wang Fu Sung instructed his soldiers to bind reeds together into torches and mount guard on the city walls, after which he sent out a band of daring men who stealthily made their way through the lines and started the fire with loud shouts and yells. Simultaneously, a glare of light shot up from the city walls, and Wang Fu Sung, sounding his drums, led a rapid charge which threw the rebels into confusion and put them to headlong flight.
Dumu said, "If the wind is in the east, begin burning to the east of the enemy and follow up the attack yourself from that side. If you start a fire on the east side and then attack from the west, you will suffer in the same way as your enemy."
Regarding the enlightened ruler, Dumu said, "The warlike prince controls his soldiers by his authority, knits them together by good faith, and keeps them loyal by means of rewards. If faith decays, there will be disruption. If rewards are deficient, commands will not be respected."
Chapter 13. The Use of Spies. Divine Manipulation of the Threads.
Sun Tzu said, "Raising a host of 100,000 men and marching them great distances entails heavy loss on the people and a drain on the resources of the state. The daily expenditure will amount to 1,000 ounces of silver. There will be commotion at home and abroad, and men will drop down exhausted on the highways. As many as 700,000 families will be impeded in their labor. Hostile armies may face each other for years, striving for the victory that is decided in a single day. This being so, to remain in ignorance of the enemy's condition, simply because one grudges the outlay of 100 ounces of silver in honors and fees, is the height of inhumanity. One who acts thus is no leader of men, no help to his sovereign, and no master of victory. What enables the wise sovereign and the good general to strike and conquer, achieving things beyond the reach of ordinary men, is foreknowledge. Now this foreknowledge cannot be elicited from spirits. It cannot be obtained inductively from experience, nor by any deductive calculation. Knowledge of the enemy's dispositions can only be obtained from other men. Hence, the use of spies, of whom there are 5 classes: local spies, internal spies, converted spies, doomed spies, surviving spies. When these 5 kinds of spies are all at work, none can discover the secret system. This is called the divine manipulation of the threads.
back news from the enemy's camp. Hence it follows that there must be no more intimate relations in the whole army than those maintained with spies. No one should be more liberally rewarded, and nowhere else should greater secrecy be preserved. Spies cannot be usefully employed without a certain intuitive sagacity. Spies cannot be properly managed without benevolence and directness. Without subtle ingenuity of mind, one cannot make certain of the truth of their reports. Be subtle. Be subtle. And use your spies for every kind of business. If a secret piece of news is divulged by a spy before the time is ripe, he must be put to death together with the person to whom the secret was told. Whether the object be to crush an army, to storm a city, or to assassinate an individual, it is always necessary to begin by finding out the names of the attendants, the aides-de-camp, the doorkeepers, and sentries of the general in command. Our spies must be commissioned to ascertain these. The enemy's spies who have come to spy on us must be sought out, tempted with bribes, led away, and comfortably housed. Thus, they will become converted spies and available for our service. It is through the information brought by the converted spy that we are able to acquire and employ local and internal spies. It is owing to his information again that we can cause the doomed spy to carry false tidings to the enemy. Lastly, it is by his information that the surviving spy can be used on appointed occasions. The end and aim of spying in all its 5 varieties is knowledge of the enemy. And this knowledge can only be derived in the first instance from the converted spy. Hence, it is essential that the converted spy be treated with the utmost liberality. Of old, the rise of the Yin dynasty was due to Yi Chu, who had served under Xia. Likewise, the rise of the Zhou dynasty was due to Liu Ya, who had served under the Yin. Hence, it is only the enlightened ruler and the wise general who will use the highest intelligence of the army for purposes of spying, and thereby they achieve great results. Spies are a most important element in war, because upon them depends an army's ability to move.
Mei Yao Chen said, "Knowledge of the spirit world is to be obtained by divination. Information in natural science may be sought by inductive reasoning. The laws of the universe can be verified by mathematical calculation. But the dispositions of the enemy are ascertainable through spies, and spies alone."
Du Mu said, "In the enemy's country, win people over by kind treatment and use them as spies."
Enumerating those likely to serve as internal spies, he cited worthy men who have been degraded from office, criminals who have undergone punishment, favorite concubines who are greedy for gold, men who are grieved at being in subordinate positions or who have been passed over in the distribution of posts, others who are anxious that their side should be defeated in order that they may have a chance of displaying their ability and talents, fickle turncoats who always want to have a foot in each boat. Officials of these kinds should be secretly approached and bound to one's interest by means of rich presents. In this way, you will be able to find out the state of affairs in the enemy's country, ascertain the plans that are being formed against you, and, moreover, disturb the harmony and create a breach between the sovereign and his ministers. But there is a necessity for extreme caution in dealing with internal spies.
Of converted spies, Zhang Yu said, "We must tempt the converted spy into our service because it is he who knows which of the local inhabitants are greedy of gain and which of the officials are open to corruption."
its spies, Duyu said, "By means of heavy bribes and liberal promises, detach them from the enemy's service and induce them to carry back false information, as well as to spy in turn on their own countrymen."
And of doomed spies, we do things calculated to deceive our own spies, who must be led to believe that they have been unwittingly disclosed. Then, when these spies are captured in the enemy's lines, they will make an entirely false report, and the enemy will take measures accordingly, only to find that we do something quite different. The spies will thereupon be put to death.
Dumu further spoke of surviving spies. "This is the ordinary class of spies who should form a regular part of the army. Your surviving spy must be a man of keen intellect, though an outward appearance a fool. He must be of shabby exterior, but with a will of iron. He must be active, robust, and endowed with physical strength and courage. He must be thoroughly accustomed to all sorts of dirty work, able to endure hunger and cold, shame and ignominy."
Of the sagacity required by one who uses spies, Dumu said, "Before using spies, we must assure ourselves as to their integrity of character and the extent of their experience and skill. A brazen face and a crafty disposition are more dangerous than mountains or rivers. It takes a man of genius to penetrate such." Jia Lin said, "An army without spies is like a man without ears or eyes." Fighting South of the Castle, an anonymous Chinese poem circa 124 BCE.
They fought south of the castle. They died north of the wall. They died in the moors and were not buried. Their flesh was the food of crows.
"Tell the crows we are not afraid. We have died in the moors and cannot be buried. Crows, how can our bodies escape you?"
The waters flowed deep, and the rushes in the pool were dark. The riders fought and were slain. Their horses wandered neighing. By the bridge there was a house. Was it south? Was it north? The harvest was never gathered.
How can we give you your offerings? You served your prince faithfully, though all in vain. I think of you, faithful soldiers. Your service shall not be forgotten. For in the morning you went out to battle, and at night you did not return.
Dove Audio presents Sun Tzu's Art of War, adapted by Stephen Levine, read by Lawrence Silver and Pete Wong, with Stephen Levine as Shana Zuber.
If you write anything on your computer, you need to get grounded.
I write pretty much all day, every day.
Sun Tzu, a philosopher general of ancient China, assembled his observations on warfare into 13 chapters, creating the classic work known as The Art of War.
This was a long time ago, and times have surely changed. Yet this book of the 13 chapters has not only survived, it has exerted an extraordinary influence on the modern world, perhaps particularly in the last 10 years or so. People of all persuasions, from all walks of life, buyers and sellers, soldiers and brokers, backers and hackers, laws and outlaws, all have found inspiration and sound practical guidance here.
The period with which Sun Tzu is usually linked, roughly the mid-4th to the mid-5th century before the Common Era, was a high point in the evolution of human wisdom and achievement. Among Sun Tzu's near contemporaries were Lao Tzu, Confucius, Zoroaster, Gautama Buddha, Pythagoras and Pindar, Heraclitus and Herodotus, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Aesop, the prophets Ezekiel and Jeremiah, and Pericles of Athens. Religion, philosophy, music, art, science, and literature flourished. So did war and conquest.
There were fortifications and conflagrations, occupations and liberations, coronations and usurpations. Pharaohs, kings, and tyrants rose and fell. Empires were lost and won. For nearly 50 years, the Romans fought the Etruscans, and the Persians fought the Greeks. In China, feudal states were at almost constant war. Dynasties rose and fell with cruel regularity. In such a time, a fine balance had to be maintained between the traditional, peaceful civic virtues upon which Chinese culture had been built and other, more militaristic principles. Even Confucius, circa 551 to 478 BCE, who was probably a contemporary of Sun Tzu and who was known for his advocacy of peace, was quoted as saying, "If I fight, I win."
The historian Sima Qian, a principal biographer of Sun Tzu, writing around 100
venerated the arts of scholarship and learning. Yet when the barbarians of the River Huai revolted, he sallied forth and chastised them. When Confucius held office under the Duke of Lu, he said, "If peaceful negotiations are in progress, warlike preparations should have been made beforehand." Sima Qian also stated that
military weapons are the means used by the sage to punish violence and cruelty, to give peace to troubled times, to remove difficulties and dangers, and to aid those who are in peril. Every animal with blood in its veins and horns on its head will fight when it is attacked. How much more will man, who carries in his breast the faculties of love and hatred, joy and anger. When he is pleased, a feeling of affection springs up within him. When angry, his poison sting is brought into play. That is the natural law which governs his being.
Sima Qian also said of Sun Tzu that he was a native of the Qi state. He told this story about the art of war being brought to the attention of Ho Lu, the reigning king of Wu from 514 to 496 BC. Ho Lu said to Sun Tzu, "I have carefully perused your 13 chapters. May I submit your theory of managing soldiers to a little test?" Sun Tzu replied, "You may." Ho Lu asked, "May the test be applied to women?" The answer was again in the affirmative. So arrangements were made to bring one